I don't think that you ever set out to be a CEO. It's something that just happens. What I've really learned more than anything else as I became a CEO is, it is lonelier than you can ever anticipate.
Ben Dorks is a proud Nottingham lad, big Nottingham Forest fan, and from the age of 14, he wanted to pursue a career in the field of sales. Upon doing that, Ben quickly came to the realization that sales is more of a science than an art, and that suited his style very well. And his trajectory was established, fueled by the IT adoption and digital transformation boom of the early 2000s, right through to the point of setting up his own IT company in 2004 with his brother. Fast forward 8 years, Ben's company was acquired by a larger organization called Ideagen, and then he went on to become the CEO in 2018. And what a journey that was. We discussed how sales has changed since the early days of his career, what it means to be a CEO, effective delegation, the impact of AI on the compliance industry and other industries, and being driven and relentlessly optimistic. We talk about that a couple of points during the conversation. The compliance and regulation space is not the most glamorous of areas, but this is a real human story with fascinating insights and anecdotes. This really is a great conversation full of value. This is Ben Dorks. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast. How are you today in sunny Nottingham?
Well, Nottingham is sunny, which on its after the past few months is a miracle on its own. But yes, doing very well, and thank you for the opportunity, Gareth. Great to meet you.
Likewise, and I'm really excited to unpack a number of things. It's a crazy world at the moment, and we've got lots to talk about. But let's start with this one, Ben. What does good leadership mean to you?
I use a pretty unusual RIP, which is probably not the best way to describe leadership, but sometimes it certainly feels like that. And I break that down into the three areas. So good leadership for me is about responsibility. Leaders stand up and be counted and take the responsibility for their actions and the way that they behave, and that's every day, whether people are looking at you or not, and that is everything from the numbers to how you think about the individuals to the outcomes that you're trying to deliver. The second part of leadership for me is leading with impact. And trying to make sure that you are making a difference each and every day. Trying to make sure that you're leaning in to the challenges that are in front of you. And I think for me, most importantly, when we look at leading for impact, is making sure that the individuals that are working with you are all aligned and aiming towards the same goals. And finally, it's about the people. Ultimately, any business is about the people and the individuals. We talk quite a lot within our organization about how do we make the boat go faster. And to do that, you've got to create a really open and transparent culture where we can all work together to achieve those same outcomes, but also that we can, constructively criticize each other, but within a very psychological, safe space. And so for us, creating when we think about people, it's creating an organization where there's no glass ceilings, where people can really feel like they're part of the family and they can achieve great things. And so ultimately, RIP may not be the best terminology, but it's something that as an organization we live by each and every day.
I love that. Brilliant. I think you covered all bases there, Ben. I agree with all of that. That's a fantastic answer. So let's delve back to the beginning then. I have to say one thing, looking at your background and the research we've done, one thing that strikes me is that you're not somebody who's jumped around to loads of jobs. You're very loyal. You've obviously just excelled up through the sales route into your current role of CEO. So I'd be fascinated to understand and unpack that a little bit. So the question I've got is, how did you get into sales? I'm sure you're going to tell me you fell into it, which is what most people say, but tell us about that early part of your career. What was sales like during that time when you first got into the industry?
I wanted to be a salesman from about 14 years old.
Oh,
So
brilliant. I'm happy you weren't one of these people who just fell into it as a second choice. I'm so glad, because that was the same as me, Ben. So I'm glad you said that.
my dad worked for Alba, the old electronics company. So,
Oh, yeah. I know,
you had
yeah.
your Sony Walkman, and I went to school with my Alba Walkman, which was never quite the same thing.
It was about 30 quid cheaper, though, wasn't it? So, it was a good piece of kit.
It was 30 quid cheaper and lasted about a third of the amount of time.
Was it a British company then, Alba, yeah?
I think it was Korean or something like that. It was when they first came over, and then you had your Alba Walkman and turntables for your decks and all that type of good stuff. So it was quite popular for a small amount of time at school. And so he was a salesperson, and my stepfather who brought me up was also a salesperson. And so for me, I always found school quite a challenge. And having initially wanted to be a vet, but realised you actually needed to turn up at school, then sales was the second best option. And so I sort of joined sales when I left school at 16. Started off selling paper and business forms and letterheads into the industrial estates of Leicestershire, which I can assure you is a proving ground. Creates great resilience.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's just put it like that.
So you were door-to-door sales then? You were proper hardcore frontline door-to-door sales, is it?
Proper hardcore door-to-door sales. I had to go, if I couldn't get a meeting with the buyer, i.e. get through the sort of receptionist gatekeeper, then I had to collect a compliment slip with the buyer's name on it. And then I had to go back to my boss at the end of every single day, and you would count out, and you had to have done at least 60 door knocks during that time, and 4 meetings of at least 20 minutes each. And you had to be able to demonstrate that you were going to do 2 quotes from that that period.
That's pretty similar. So I was talking to David Buttress, who's the founder of JustEat.com. And Just Eat, obviously a very disruptive company. And he said when he started the organization, him and another guy who'd already started a similar business in Denmark, but he was in the UK trying to sell this new concept to restaurants. And he was working off a very similar ratio to that. X amount of visits, he would get X amount of conversions. He was essentially walking into restaurants and selling them this dream of receiving orders online, which was crazy. It was a difficult world in the early 2000s when he started. So yeah, but it's interesting how he kept that ratio from when it was just him and one other guy right to when they were a public company. So can you tell us about what type of salesperson you were and how did you perform in your role and why did you excel? What sort of attributes have you got that made you successful in this world?
To be honest, in those early years, Gareth, it was as much about resilience and confidence as it was about anything else. I think subsequently, as you grow and mature, what you really learn is the ability to speak to lots of types of different individuals. The way that you're able to converse across multiple groups, I think, becomes super important. And I think ultimately, what stood it apart was just, if I'm really honest, was really hard work. I've never met anybody successful who's not been a little bit obsessive and prepared to walk the extra mile each and every day. I was certainly that in my early career, and I think many would still say I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. So you basically, well, they say once a salesman, ever the salesman, I suppose, don't they? But you worked within the IT space, though, come the turn of the millennium, and you were selling IBM products, I think, is that right, to the automotive industry?
Yes, right. Yep. I basically got into IT sales because of the money. I remember my first car was the old 1.7 turbo diesel Cavalier. For those that are old enough.
Nice.
And I would be turning up at meetings, and the IT salesperson would be there with their shiny BMW 3 Series, and I was like, I'd like a bit of that. So I sort of got into IT sales through perseverance. Once I sort of found my opportunity there, then it grew and evolved, and ended up selling CATIA, which is a 3D design program to automotive and aerospace suppliers. Even through the terrible times post 9/11.
Yeah, sure. So looking back now, knowing what you know, what were the sort of most important milestones in your career before you embarked on the Ideagen journey? That earlier part of your career. What were the sort of key milestones which set you on the path, which you ultimately went on to?
Probably the biggest milestone was when I learned that sales was not just an art form, but was also a science. I read a book called Power Based Selling, actually, and I went away from that and went, "Wow, this is a real opportunity for me personally," and subsequently have tried to learn it all each and every day. Probably the next biggest milestone for me was starting my own business in 2004. Having been reasonably successful in tech sales over the last 5 or 6 years. Those heady days of the late 90s and early noughties where salespeople earned too much commission, and using that to start my own business. And
Sure.
that really has been the sort of basis and platform from which the next nearly 20 years of my life have come from.
Sure. So you set up Plumtree Group in November 2004. Yeah. Can you talk us through how that came about and what it was like to get in the trenches and grow a business from scratch? What did you learn from that experience?
I think you learn more during that experience than probably any other point in your life. I think you
Yeah.
walk into starting your own business, probably believing that you know it all, and then subsequently realizing that you know nothing. I was at that time, so we developed some document management software for the healthcare market, which was really supporting hospital laboratories to be able to report their pathology reports and x-ray reports effectively, and be able to manage the incoming requests and all those types of things more effectively as well. And it was a lot of door knocking. The early sales, which you think are going to happen overnight, take 3 times as long as you think. You become a product manager. I was a salesperson. I was the project manager that went and implemented it. I was doing the onboarding, the customer success, the training, and certainly until probably 2008 to 2009, I was also the 24/7 support desk. So I think I learned everything, but what I really learned is the value of people within that, and
Sure.
that you can't build a business on your own. You need to surround yourself with great people and great individuals, and create a really positive, forward-looking culture. And it only works if you achieve that.
Yeah, sure. So, can you talk us through how it came about, though? How did you? Was it you? And was it a conversation in a pub? Was it something you'd been thinking about for years? Well, what was the specific moment that you thought, right, we're going to do this?
My brother used to work for Chorus down in South Wales. He was one of their graduate program, and he'd been tasked with shutting down one of the furnaces. It sort of was very emotional for him having to go through that process. And so we sort of sat in a pub one day post him doing that, and he said, "Look, I'm leaving. I don't want to do this anymore." And I said, "Well, I'm happy to. I want to come back to Nottingham because I was working in London at the time, and I had a young family in Nottingham." Had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old at the time. And so I said, "Why don't we start a business? I've got this great idea." And he was always much more sensible with money than I, and he was like, "That's great. I'll manage the money and the process, and
Yeah.
you go and sell it." And I said, "This is great. This is going to be a wonderful partnership." The fact that we're still really close together means that we've done okay, but it's
It's, yeah. I'm sure you had your moments,
we
Ben.
we definitely had our moments in that.
And rightly so. You have to. I mean, I'm sure it's made your relationship infinitely stronger, isn't it? But you went on a journey. It took, was it 8 years, and then you got acquired by Ideagen. So, can you tell us about that? Where did that interest come from, and what was it like to see the fruits of your labor really get recognized with interest from a bigger organization like Ideagen? And just tell us about that whole thing, how that came about, and what was that acquisition like for you personally?
Yeah, so we'd almost sold about 2 years before. Yeah, and I think actually that's probably one of the best things that happened to us. So we'd gone through a really tough time, as many had in 2009, and we'd had to take some people out of the business and pay the salaries in December 2009 on the credit card, and all that, almost desperate to exit. As we went through that process, I think we learned a huge amount about what businesses look for when they acquire other businesses. So when we sort of went into it the next time round, we were much more focused. I think we were more articulate about what the hope and expectations were for the business. I'd known David, who sort of set up Ideagen as a vehicle on the AIM markets, and I'd like to say it was some really convoluted process, but I was sat at home He phoned me up and said, I've been looking at your business, I've looked at the track record, confirm your revenue number, confirmed your profit number. He said, do you have a price in your head? I said, I do. And he went, well, I'll give you 2.5 million. And I went, that's the price. And that was that.
That sounds a lot cleaner than it normally is for those type of transactions and engagements. So yeah, you did well there, I think.
Yes, I did. I had to phone my brother up and say, "Hey, Barney, I think I've agreed a price for selling the business. Are you okay with it?" But
I bet that was a phone call he wasn't expecting.
The reality was that we were at a time where we were looking at, what do we do next in terms of future investment to grow. Revenue was about 2.5, 3 million. It wasn't the heady prices that you get in today's world. So do we think we can get to 9 or 10? What does that VC funding look like, and all those types of good things? And I think, being honest, I'd spent 8 years doing this, and I was really excited about the fresh challenge of being part of something that had bigger and faster ambitions. So yeah, it was a relatively simple process. DD was 6 weeks, and happened pretty much just before Christmas 2012. My first working day was the 4th of January 2013 in Ideagen.
Great Christmas present as well, and I'm sure you had a lovely Christmas break that year then. But so look, I think you mentioned the word ambition there, Ben, and I wanted to sort of pin you on that a little bit, because what strikes me about yourself is obviously you've built a successful business and you've exited, and now you're a CEO of an organization, and so you clearly are, probably got a bit more ambition and drive about you than perhaps the average man in the street. And I just wanted to ask, I know you're a proud Nottingham lad, your dad's done a lot for the local community, you've got a lot of altruism in your sort of dealings, you do stuff for the local community yourself, but I'm really keen to understand, where does this drive come from?
I think it's a bit of nature and nurture and experiences. My family have always been workers, and have worked really, really hard. So I sort of grew up in an environment where my mum wouldn't have been home until 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and I learned how to cook jacket potato, beans and cheese pretty expertly.
That's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know. And so for me, I think it was sort of part of my family, that I saw it each and every day. I think the second part is I'd made some promises to my father that I was going to be successful, because what he really saw was somebody who'd flunked school most of his life. So I had to go and work hard to live up to my promises to him. The third part of it is it is just who I am. I am a relentlessly optimistic, relentlessly dissatisfied person. I always think we can do more, achieve more, and so I just have this inner drive that I wake up every morning and I'm excited about the day and the opportunities that it creates.
Yeah, sure. When you are giving young people advice who have got aspirations to grow businesses of their own, what kind of generic advice do you give to young people in terms of, that they could benefit from, that, you wish you'd known when you were their age, sort of thing?
I think the generic stuff it is about confidence and it is about resilience. I would often suggest that you do it earlier in life rather than later, because the stress of life gets bigger once you've got families and mortgages and challenges of school and all those things. So I'd always suggest do it early, believe in yourself, and every single day is a new day and a new opportunity, and don't get dragged down by bad news on a particular day. That resilience, that inner drive, that ambition. Our company values are ambition, adventure and community. Certainly starting your own business is ambition and adventure. You really you've got to love the change, the challenge, and if you believe in it and you believe in what you're trying to achieve, then the UK is a flourishing enterprise of entrepreneurs, and far more so than many other economies. And I think it's something that we just need to really encourage, because there are so many great ideas out there. Obviously, even today in the press, there's conversation in the press about jobs disappearing because of the introduction of AI. IBM announced something earlier this week along the same lines. So what they actually see is, what am I going to do? How am I going to be involved? What's my future look like? For me, I think it's all about articulating the opportunities available to them, the wide variety of careers in technology, and as I said, trying to create that unimagined future. And that's certainly, a large part of our community program doing in our sort of various global locations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wanted to talk about AI actually, Ben. Have you had a fiddle around with ChatGPT? Have you used any other AI based tools as a consumer?
As everybody, I can't believe a tech leader's not at least gone on and played around and asked it some questions.
I use it every day. I got to be honest. All the questions I'm asking you, Ben, were generated by AI. No, I'm joking. But yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Well, you can't help yourself, can you? You know, and certainly when I'm trying to do my 9-year-old homework, then you know it's a really useful teaching tool.
Sure.
We are already starting to look at how we introduce it. You know, so there's some great technology out there that enables us. For example, if I'm doing a risk analysis, I could put in what are the risks associated with hot yoga. We'll go for a very safe subject, you know, and it would automatically, if you type that into ChatGPT, it will come back and say dehydration, pulling your muscles, dirty, dirty, dumb. And then it would actually say, "Here, look, here's the benefits. These are the controls that you can put in place." And it will actually create you a pretty reasonable risk profile in about 35 seconds. You know, so
Yeah.
for us, already we can see lots of opportunities to enable medium-sized organizations and smaller organizations to understand, you know, their risk profile. Secondly to that, for us, what's really exciting about AI is the ability for us to start using it for predictive risks, you know, and that's you know, looking at health and safety. If you carry on this trend, this is definitely going to happen. If we
Yeah,
take
sure.
all of this big data lake that we have, and we have over 11,500 global customers, then we know that if you're doing A and B, the outcome is definitely C and D, and that could lead to a major incident, you know, and that could be fatalities. We do a lot in the food industry, all the way from farm to fork. So that could be, you know, affecting the quality of the food on the table for these individuals, or you know, the life sciences industry, where we do a lot in the drug approval process. Using that AI to actually manage forward-looking outcomes, I think is hugely exciting for us, and will have a really
Yeah.
positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can we maybe look at AI then? Because there's so many directions you can go with this, because it's going to be so impactful on so many industries. But let's stick to what we know then, Ben. Okay, so let's look at it through the prism of sales and marketing. Okay, in terms of AI technology, like innovation, has this started to change how you guys operate from a sales and marketing perspective? Are you embracing tools for blog writing, social media posting, writing content, etc., etc.? Are you already reacting and using tools to benefit your sales and marketing purposes? And the second part is this technology changing the type of profile we look for when trying to hire good salespeople? You know what I mean? Are we looking for people who are going to embrace technology more these days? Or is it still about the old fashioned sort of, blagging good talker, that type of thing?
I mean, the AI specifically enables us to be far more forward-looking in things like our funnel management. It can turn around and say, you know, based upon this whole profile of customers and the time they've been in our funnel and the sales individual and you know the market and the product, that actually this is the likely outcome. So suddenly, based upon a whole set of data, you can start getting really predictive analysis about what your future pipeline looks like. We also use some of the sort of visual and listening tools that actually start to pick out what's good and bad about conversations, and can feed that back into some of the micro learning for those individual salespeople. And that's definitely been beneficial when you start to actually dive into the detail of how your salespeople engage with your customers. And I think as we continue to move forward, certainly marketing have really embraced the AI, and so they don't write our blogs, but they're certainly supportive in terms of some of the education around our blogs and our content specifically. Quite a lot of our applications are content driven around regulatory requirements, and we certainly use AI to be more effective in some of that back office data gathering than just having tens and dozens of people collecting it. We can utilize the AI to be able to go and bring this information to us and validate it before putting it into the software. So I think for us, AI is an everyday. The second part of the question, probably a more personal answer. I'm a great believer that sales is both a science and an art form. And I would try and sort of articulate that. If you had paint by numbers, you can still get anybody to paint by numbers. But if Picasso painted by numbers, it would still look like an absolute piece of art. And I sort of view sales in that fashion that yes, you can take anybody and make them a salesperson, but there's also a little part of the natural DNA that makes them a great sales individual. And so, what we're really looking for is people who need to be able to adapt and change, and I think in today's sales market, you need to be able to adapt and change quicker than ever before. Turning around and saying you were the rank Xerox top salesperson in 1989 is no longer a guarantee of getting a job. What we're really looking for is people that are resilient, looking flexible about change. Great listeners, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that proportion, I think is still hugely important, but also really willing to adapt because users are adapting faster than ever before. And that means us as a technology business and the individuals within it need to adapt faster than ever before.
That's a really good answer. I think listening is such an underappreciated skill within sales, isn't it? I think so many people think sales is about talking when it's actually about listening and changing and adapting, isn't it? So I wanted to talk about becoming a CEO. What was the biggest change between being the chief customer officer to the CEO? What extra accountability did you take on? Was it what you expected?
That is a great question, Gareth. I don't think that you ever set out to be a CEO. If I'm really honest, I don't think there's a set of skills that make you a CEO. I think it's something that just happens. And I don't think, if I'm really honest with myself, I'm a salesman first and foremost, and I put a CEO hat on every day, having taken off my sales hat. What I've really learned more than anything else as I became a CEO is, it is lonelier than you can ever anticipate. People often talk about the loneliness of a CEO, but there is an acute loneliness that you get as a CEO as you're running and growing a business. And so what I really realized is very, very quickly is you just need great people around you. It is the standing on the shoulders of giants is, I think, the best type of leadership. And so bringing in people that really complement you and are additive to your culture and what you're trying to create, I think was my very early lesson of being a CEO. I was very lucky in the early years. I had great support from the former chief exec of Ideagen, who was my chairman, and was brilliantly supportive. My brother was still here at that point in those early years as well. I was very lucky that I had that early support network in what is probably the most difficult bit, which is that first 12 to 18 months of becoming a CEO for the first time. And subsequent to that, it's just about the people. If you get great people, then you are surfing their wave. And I've just been lucky enough to surf the wave that they're creating each and every day.
That's a great answer again. I really wanted to pin you on the delegation piece there because I think this is, again, just like listening is an underrated skill for a salesperson. I think delegation is an underrated skill in any leadership role, and it's something that sounds easy when you're talking about it, but to actually live it and do it well on a regular basis is an art form. Delegation done well is probably is up there with one of the most important things that a CEO needs to get right. What is the key and the secret to good delegation? How do you delegate things effectively to motivate people, the people around you?
I think, to be fair, Gareth, it's both an art and a science, because I think you can read every book and you can read the sort of philosophical approach to how do I delegate, but fundamentally has to come from within you as an individual, in the belief that other people are better at doing it than you are. And even if they're not better at doing it, they will, through experience and time and coaching and mentoring, be better at doing it than you are. And if you have that as your sort of belief system, then once you've got over the hump of the first two or three where it all goes horribly wrong, and you sort of want to scream and shout. But once you get over that belief, then it really makes a big difference. And internally in Ideagen, we have something called "There's no such thing as failure, only feedback." We
Yeah.
absolutely believe in that. And that just encourages delegation all the way through the organization to enable empowerment, to enable people to grow and develop, and take away those glass ceilings that often exist within organizations because people never get the chance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's move on to regulation and compliance then. And you guys have been in this world for a very long time. How do Ideagen differentiate themselves from other companies in the regulatory and compliance software industry? What's different about you guys?
I think the regulation and compliance industry I mean, a lot of it's about who the end users are. So, we talk, internally about supporting those safe hands and quiet voices that protect those organizations. And that is, for us about domain advocacy and thought leadership in the space. Very rarely is the person in charge of compliance or regulation listened to by the C suite. Often it's thought about as something that is a tick box process rather than something that is part of the DNA of the organization and about improving business processes. So I think what we've tried to do to differentiate is really be really supportive of those individuals within the organization, try to give them a voice and create software that is really, really simple to use. And by that, consumers are changing behavior each and every day for technology companies. And so our biggest challenge is in regulation and compliance software, we're asking you for the extra 6 bits of information you don't want to give and the extra 4 click buttons that you don't want to go through and submit this and then verify and validate that. And you've got consumers who are used to sort of flicking through Netflix, or Amazon, where everything is, dead simple and as quick as a flash. So I think for us, it's about making sure that we get the right support, the right leadership into supporting our customers, and our customers' customers. If you take the
Yeah.
food industry and farm to fork, it's about my mum eating her food at night and taking her medicines. But we also need to make sure that it's really simple because the compliance officer going in and saying, hey, you've got 60 more things to fill in, just gets huge pushback from the business. So really making it part of the DNA of an organization and
Yeah.
simple to use is really been the big difference for us over the years.
So has the evolution of AI technology that we've seen accelerated in the last sort of 6 to 12 months? Has that changed a great deal in the compliance world then yet? Because there's going to be a lot more to regulate, isn't there? Things are talking to each other a bit more now. Everything's going to become more efficient. Things are going to get created more seamlessly through automation. How does this affect the world of compliance and regulation?
A bit of Oscar Wilde, really. The only certainties in life are death, taxes, and more regulation.
Yeah.
AI will create a whole new set of regulation on its own. I have no doubts at all over the next 3 to 5 years. And so for us, although AI is still pretty nascent within the regulatory and compliance industry, it's an emerging tech. We can see some future trends where especially in things like the banking and finance insurance industries, within the aviation industry, around safety management, where you're able to really start driving that far more predictive behavior, I think, which is going to be really, really important. But also reducing some of the monotony of compliance within those industries and within those markets, and I think that's really important. If you can really drive some of those back office improvements as well, then AI moves from being that tick box into something that is absolutely embedded into a business, then that becomes really advantageous for that organization and that organization's customers.
Yeah, for sure. I think AI needs to be regulated for a plethora of reasons, doesn't it? Because it can basically create imbalances. It could be biased towards certain outcomes and things like that. It's a bit of a minefield, I think, isn't it? Have you sort of been asked to work with regulators, perhaps, or with your clients to ensure that they're setting things up correctly, like from the sort of embryonic stage with new projects? Are you doing a lot of consultancy about this subject right now?
So you're absolutely right. AI doesn't have diversity
Yeah.
and inclusivity at its heart. So it has an unconscious bias, to use the sort of people term. And there's certainly some fairly embryonic conversations that are happening on that subject about exactly what does it look like and how do we manage it. Although I'm aware of a few bodies that are looking to start to formalize that into medium term objectives of creating regulation around AI. But being honest, I think most bodies and most regulators have been taken by surprise at the pace of change over the last 3 to 4 months. I was certainly in a conversation not long ago with an unnamed body who, was basically thinks AI was only invented 3 months ago when they saw about it in the newspaper, post
Yeah.
the big front page announces on ChatGPT.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hit the mainstream in the last couple of months, but obviously this has been work in progress for the last 30 years, isn't it, I suppose? But I want to turn the conversation back to yourself, Ben. I'm really keen. You're a CEO, you're a busy chap, you got a lot on your plate, you got volunteer commitments as well. How do you stay mentally sharp and avoid feeling overwhelmed? How do you avoid burnout, basically?
I'm really lucky. The office is based where I was brought up. So, 3 miles away from here is where my mum still lives, and my brother who's down the road, and my other brother who's a Baptist minister. My old friends are still my old school friends, so I'm really privileged that I go to football and watch the mighty Nottingham Forest very rarely on a Saturday at 3 o'clock. Now we're in the Premiership, just to make sure everybody knows that, with the people I went to school with who, don't recognise me as a CEO of a business that recently was sold for £1 billion to private equity. They just know me as Ben, and that's fantastic. That just sort of keeps it very authentic and very grounded. And they take the mickey out of me each and every day, as they absolutely should do. And so I'm really lucky that I don't live in a world that does anything else that be supportive of what we're trying to do.
So, productivity advice. How do you stay productive? Have you got any tools that you use? How do you ensure that you get through your day in the most productive way possible?
I am a big reader, so I read every morning. So I'm an early riser, and I
Leaders are readers, eh?
leaders are readers, and I do. It is something I've followed for years and years and years now, and I take a little bit out of every book. I think it's I think
Yeah,
a lot of it's just repeat, rinse and repeat, but there's always some nugget, which is great.
sure.
I'm a big user of OneNote. Yeah, brilliant. Use my iPad. I scribble everything down because I prefer writing than I do typing. And I sort of religiously walk around with my iPad and my OneNote. Outside of that, I'm really I like the flexibility. So I don't actually have any really predetermined long-term meetings in the diary. I don't like agendas. The sort of saying is, be brief, be bold, be bright, be gone. If you're having a meeting with me, I just like people to say it as it is, good news, bad news, and go in and don't give me the history, just give me the answer, and I'll go away and do it. And I never take myself too seriously, to be honest. I still sit here every single day, Gareth, look in the mirror and go, how did we build a tech unicorn? and, and why me? So I've always just been a believer that if you work hard and try hard and don't take yourself too seriously, then being honest, it's all okay.
Very well said. So, what person, book, or story have you been inspired? You're a big reader. I think I heard you say elsewhere that you read sort of 5+ hours a week, which is very commendable. But or maybe it's a documentary or a film. Or what piece of content have you been inspired by recently, Ben?
I love Satya Nadella's book. I think that's brilliant about his background
Oh, okay,
and where
I've
he
not seen that one.
where he came from, the challenges he has, both at home, and at work, and you know, when you talk about resilience and the constant, fight to and drive to succeed, I think that's a great book and epitomizes, what great leadership looks like, and I certainly look up
Yeah.
to what he's done and the way he's
Oh, yeah.
gone about driving and building such a fantastic business on what was already a great legacy is
Yeah, sure. But he's
truly awesome.
reinvented them, isn't he? He's
Oh,
reinvented them to compete with the next generation, the following generation. So yeah, I think you're referring to Hit Refresh, yeah, which is his sort of memoir book
Correct.
type thing, isn't it?
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've not read that myself, but we'll put that on the show notes.
For me, there's a great book, and I've forgotten the name of it, and I do apologise. I'll make sure that they send it through, which is around the I think it's called Captain of the Ship, around the sort of US naval commander that was managing a submarine, a failing submarine, and just the way that he transformed the motivation and culture of that crew into being about a performance-based culture, and
Right.
driving a completely different behavior amongst each and every person. It was is also a great book, and highly recommend that as well as something that I certainly took more out of than I do some of the other books I read.
So I think you're referring to It's Your Ship by Captain Michael Abrashoff. Does that sound familiar?
That's the one, yes.
I asked that question to a lot of to all the guests, and I think one of them has said that one before. I've not read it, but it's a very highly rated book for sure, for certainly for things like management techniques and building culture. So yeah, we will pop that on the show notes. But Ben, look, we've come towards the end now. So look, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a joy. Yeah, we've covered a lot of great, valuable and entertaining ground. So thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thank you very much for the invite, Gareth.
Wow, that was a great interview. There was so much to draw out here, as ever. I could just do an entire show on just talking about this interview, but I think I really wanted to home in on one. And there was one thing that stood out for me, which was Ben's comments and his explanation around achieving success as a CEO. I thought this was very insightful. He started by saying that nobody sets out to be a CEO. It's just somewhere where you end up. I'm not sure whether that's the case with every CEO, but I think it's probably the case with most of them. But I thought it was really interesting that he described himself as a salesman first and foremost, who puts the CEO hat on every day. It's a great way to look at it. And his description of being a CEO was quite profound, though. Lonelier than you can ever anticipate is how I think he described it. But he talks about just having great people around you and then standing on the shoulders of giants. If you get great people, you are essentially surfing the wave, which I think is a brilliantly succinct way to sum up the role of an effective CEO. And I thought was a real highlight of the interview. It's Ben Dorks. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for downloading this episode. We really love doing this show and are absolutely humbled by all of the incredible people who download and listen, plus the incredible guests who take the time to come on and share their secrets and experiences with our listeners. Please can I ask that you take a couple of seconds to subscribe or follow the show. This small action means a lot to us and helps us greatly. Thank you. As you quite possibly have heard me mentioning in the past, we record the mass majority of our episodes at an amazing studio facility here in Cardiff at Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and scaling businesses geared towards supporting growth in tech, digital and creative industries across an ever-increasing collection of locations and partner locations, UK-wide and internationally. It really is the perfect place for your business to start up, scale up, accelerate, or innovate. Head over to tramshedtech.co.uk or just search Tramshed Tech on your favorite social media platform.